This is the second Creative Corner video, and in this video we're going to make a metal rose out of this piece of rusty sheet metal. Let's get started. First up, I'm marking out where I'm going to draw these circles to make best use of this piece of material. And I'm making the centers, and those centers are then center punched. I give that piece of metal a good clean with a wire wheel to get all of that surface rust off, and I do this on both sides. I'm marking out the circles with those center marks that I made earlier. These circles are for the different layers of petals in the rose. Now I'm marking across in these circles so that I have 4 petals. In hindsight, the 2 largest ones should have really had 5 petals in them. I start cutting out these circles with these metal shears, and this metal plate is a little bit too thick for these metal shears. This is quite hard work, so I decide to get some help from my friend the grinder and the cut-off wheel. I do a rough cutout, and then I use the belt grinder to make the parts round. Each disc is cleaned up with a flat disc to get any mill scale or any other imperfections off. The next step is to freehand draw the petals. You don't really have to be accurate here, even if they're a little bit off. It just adds to the nature of the rose. If I had decent tin snips, I would cut this out with the tin snips, but I'm using the grinder here in this case because I have no other means of cutting it. The next step is to make the rose stem, and I'm using a bit of 8mm round bar. I turn down the end of the round bar to 6mm. That is so that I can cut a M6 thread in the end here. That allows the rose petals to be bolted onto the end of the stem. That nut fits on there perfect. I think this is going to be a bit scary. Okay, you can open your eyes. Drilling through thin metal like this is really problematic. This flower petal will turn into a helicopter blade running at 1200 RPM as the drill goes through there. And my little fingers there will probably come off second best, I think. But there is a solution that I learned from Mark Presling, and he made a video on how to drill through thin panel steel without it catching on the drill and turning into a helicopter. First you put a little dimple in the end there, and then you drill down onto that rag or cloth. I folded this over 2 times, and then you can drill through this piece of metal without it pulling up on the drill and turning into a helicopter. And that worked perfect, and you get a really good round hole in there as well. So thanks Mark for your great tip. The petals will be put onto the stem like this, and the nut will be tightened down, and then we'll get into shaping them. But before we do that, I'm going to do a bit more work on the rose stem to give it some more character. Firstly, I clean all the rust off the stem in the lathe with some sandpaper. Then I start shaping the stem, and I really need to make myself an anvil. And then I thought I have something that might help. Big chunk of steel. So back into shaping the stem, and this hammer was leaving some dents, so I started to use the smaller hammer and ironed out most of those little dents. Now I want to add some thorns to the side of the stem. So I'm building up a little bit of weld in several places. And then that weld is ground and shaped into little thorn type shapes. In the end, those thorns came out pretty good. I now need to make a sepal, which is the green part that sort of hangs down from the bottom of the rose head. I'll draw that up on this piece of steel. The sides were quite wide, so I drew it again with narrower sides, and then I cut the piece out. That piece was drilled with a 6mm hole and cleaned up with a flat disc. Here I'm adding some texture to the petals and also shaping them a little bit. More work to do on the sepal, and I'm trying to make a center line for each of the points here. And then I shape it up in the vise. I just want these to be bent right round. Finally, some panel bedding with the hammer to get the right shape that I wanted. Now the flower is assembled. And there's a nut that goes at the top, and that is locked down tight. Then I start shaping the petals. So this top one has 3 petals. I bend them all round using the gas torch there to soften the metal to make it a bit easier. The petals are wrapped around each other. This took a little bit of time. As you can see, it's on fast forward and it still takes quite a bit of time to do. And this is just the first set of petals. Now I'm heating up the top here of the petals, and I'm just bending it out a fraction to give it that realistic look. Now the camera focused on the floor here and not the flower, but it's the same process. The diameter was getting bigger, so I had to use the channel locks. Now I'm working on the sepal. Again, I'm squashing it together, heating it up, it makes it easier. Then I'm shaping the bits at the end there. The stem of the flower is quite fat, so I wanted to add another ring of petals. So I've made a bigger disc. This one's going to have 5 petals. Now there's a bunch of really complicated ways to divide a circle into 5 parts. But all I did here is just use a protractor and draw lines at 72 degrees apart. Some more freehand drawing for the petals. Then I cut them out and shape them with the cut-off wheel. This row of petals is heated and formed in the same way as I did the rest of them. That smoke that you see is oil that I quenched the flower in earlier to blacken it. Finally, just heating up the tips here to bend them out a little bit. I clean the flower off with a wire brush, and here I'm heating it up with the big guns so that I can blue it, and I do that by heating it quite hot and putting it in the oil, and as you'll see, it was pretty hot. but nothing got burnt down, so that's always good. Now it's final assembly. I cleaned the sepal and the rose stem off so they are more of a silver colour. Gives it a bit of contrast. The rose gets screwed on there. The nut is kind of captive in there, so it makes it easy to screw on. I start making a couple of leaves, and I'm actually using a real leaf from a rose to trace out onto this metal. They're cut out with the angle grinder and cleaned up on the belt grinder. I'm adding in some detail, and they're bent over down the center line. I found a couple of rusty nails, one thick and one thin, and I will use those as the leaf stems. The heads are chopped off and they're cleaned up on the wire wheel. I do a bit more panel beating to get the right shape. I tack those stems onto the leaf, and then the other end of the stem gets tacked onto the rose. And then I clean up all the welds and heat the tips of the leaves to give some nice colour. That is the rose complete. I think it came out rather nice. I hope everyone has a great day, and as always, thanks for watching.